probably going to just have to crouch for this, but let's just talk about some of the books that I'm interested in reading right now. I had to go grab my sort of number one novel of choice, which is, well, number one or two, because I'm kind of going between. I don't have the other one here. But this is Party Going, makeup stands. Party Going by Henry Green, which I really want to read. I've already, I started reading the first page and I was like, oh, stunning. Like, this already seems very up my alley. We have a dead bird, a dead pigeon, falls to the ground. I don't know if that sounded. But a pigeon falls to the ground, it's dead. A woman picks it up and walks with it, and she thinks that she decides to wash it, or that it needs to be washed. So already we have an insane character. And then the other thing I was like would probably be good to read is Indivisible by Fanny Howe. I've never read any Fanny Howe, but she's someone who has been on my radar. A lot of writers that I adore her, so I'm like, I have to read her. And I honestly, I was looking for something of hers to read, and when I went to Powell's and I picked Indivisible, I know that the idea of the novel was what really stunned me. So it seems like a woman who, a married woman, decides to sort of lock her husband up in a room, and there seems to be an obsession with God, and also just she starts to explore stories. I'm a bit hazy on the details, but it seemed very interesting and kooky, but also would address themes that I enjoy thinking about, which is faith and the divine. And I love one in general, I love obsessive relationships, and I really do enjoy when that obsession is towards God. It's not a heretic. I love a mystic, I think is what I was thinking, Simone Weil. I love that sort of the way that obsession can be translated, and the different sort of insights that can be drawn from that. So those are two things I'm would be great to read. This is not a treasure trove. This is my tote, which one of two totes that I own, I guess I can say. Love this tote a lot. The Reader tarot card inspired, but I just had a bunch of books. I think I thought I would take the bus today. I decided to splurge on an Uber, which was not great for my bank account. But I put these 4 books because in my head I was like, oh, I'm going to read them. I'm not, I wasn't, I didn't. But I do have reason for each one of them. So let me start with Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark. Yesterday I was sort of struggling because I have to write my final essay for my class on romanticism, and I really don't want to write. But also I was just I don't even know how to approach things, and I was looking for a work of literary criticism that I owned, or something, a nonfiction that was analytic, and in ways that might help me figure out my way into that essay. And honestly, she did, and no doubt about it. But also I really want to read this. I've had to read this twice for a class, for 2 different classes actually, and I never finished reading Playing in the Dark. But there's, I believe, 3 main essays here, but already her preface is really great. That's what I read yesterday, and I'm going to reread it again when I pick this up and really want to underline and take notes and everything. But she's, the way that she's looking at things and the way that she's prompting me as a reader, because the whole point of this is sort of looking at the way race and ideas of race, or it's about reading, right, and how it's affected like the literary imagination, race, and like ideas about race and assumptions, presuppositions, like things we don't even stop to like wonder, like, hey, where did that come from? Is it possible that that might be racist, or is it possible that that might be affected by, you know, the Africanist presence, for instance, as she pulls up, and she looks at these authors and she's like, there's a real joy you can sort of tell from her desire to like even just look into this project, or like to work in this project. Maybe I'll find it, but somewhere in the preface, like, she mentions how yeah, over and over again, I'm amazed by the treasure trove that American literature is. How compelling is the study of those writers who take responsibility for all of the values they bring to their art. How stunning is the achievement of those who have searched for and mined a shareable language for the words to say. But again, the idea that like it's such a treasure trove, like, even, you know, and I think of it when people sort of espouse the idea that like you, in your desire to sort of open up the canon, and this is a class that I took, Canons and Canonicity, that sort of helped me in thinking about this, right? But like in people's ideas of like, you want to open up the canon, like there's this idea that like you don't want to read those works. But like here is Toni Morrison being like, no, in reading this, we can read through this in specific ways and apply certain lens and ways of thinking and reading, so that we're able to draw something else out of these stories and draw, you know, a relationship or something that is telling us about the social conditions and material conditions of the work's creation, but also the effects that it's had on the literary imagination, and like the ways that people sort of today contemporarily are mining, you know, these stories, are mining these conventions, you know. And I think same thing with like the idea of like the shareable language also brings me to Bart, who I have on my list here. But like it might actually be The Pleasure of the Text, or SZ, one of Bart's texts, like Roland Barthes. He this one, like, we also had to read it for my class in novel, and the thing that really struck me was this idea he brought up about how there's these like shared it's basically about like the conventions that like we are now accustomed to because of the collection of works that have like, you know, I guess repeated it, so it's echoed enough that it's now convention. So you know when you come across it, like what a plot is, you know, because you've read enough novels, you've read enough of a certain sort of text to be like, this is a novel, this is what a novel should be. So that sort of like shareable idea, the different codes, he talks a lot about like codes and like the 5 different codes that form like this book of life in a sense. Sorry, congested. But form this book of life in a sense that is really it's formed collectively, because it's not like laws, it's formed through, you know, to bring it back to Morrison, like this shareable language. So yeah, I really want to be playing in the dark. Like Toni Morrison's fiction, as I've interacted with it, which is like Sula, which I read for a class, but then I never finished because I'm like in a class setting, I just like find it hard to finish reading stuff, so that's on me. But like I want to return to Sula, but I read enough of it to write an essay on it. And then Beloved and Jazz. Beloved I did finish, so that's the only Morrison I finished. Jazz I didn't finish, but like encountering her novels, like there's a real, you know, depth to her text. Like there's a real like richness, and that's something that, you know, you can also see in her nonfiction, and also the joy that, you know, she brings, like the pleasure of excavation, the pleasure of like history, the pleasure of wanting to really get deep, which I love. So this I definitely want to get to. I already brought up Bart, so I have to bring up Bart. But this is something that I've actually been reading since the summer of 2016 when I bought it. And I've never finished it, and I feel like I have notes like everywhere. But let's see, I think my notes, wow. Okay, actually, this is probably where I am. But again, like I said, like I've been reading this, you know, since 2016, so I'm on and off. But I bought this. I think I bought this because Faria Roisin had must have like posted on it on Instagram, and I was like, finally able to buy like my own books with my own money, you know. So this was one of like the first things I bought when I moved to the US. But I love as discourse is sort of fragmentary writings that Barthes did on love and ideas around love. And it's sort of, you know, he picks like a phrase or something and he's looking through certain texts. So it's not like criticism, but like there is a way that he's like parsing through, you know, like Werther is one of the writers that comes up. Proust, you know, is another writer, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, like these are different writers that like he pulls from, Diderot, and he pulls from these people, and you know he sort of mines their text for different, you know, little grammars of love, and it's a really, honestly, it's genuinely like a really fascinating text in terms of like the form and thinking of like the sort of work that you could do as a writer, you know, and I think it's also great for like the legibility, you know, it gives to these ideas of love again. So yeah, it's like, this isn't something that I have ever planned to like sort of straightforward read. Like it's definitely something I've picked up multiple times to be like, oh, you know, here's Barthes on desire, and like, you know, here's like something really insightful. But like I know when I've read this too, I found it very like sweet. I could relate to certain things, and then some of it I couldn't relate to, and it was more so the fantasy of experience, which I think is also something he talks about. But these little echoes that you see I find very interesting, affirming, and yeah, I think, you know, in terms of nonfiction, like this is just a pleasure of a read, and it's dense too, you know, despite its subject matter. I know Barthes is often thought of with like camera lucida, you know, which I find I found less accessible. I have like a PDF that I haven't like really gone through. I'm also bad at reading PDFs. Love a physical like text, but like this, you know, is dense in some places, but like rewardingly dense. So a similar sort of like pleasure in this sort of critical work that's being done in these. So I can't wait to like sort of just like spend time with those. And then I guess let me just, you know, keep going on the nonfiction trip, but The Art of Cruelty by Maggie Nelson. I always thought I finished reading this. Like in my head I was like, oh, this would be like a reread. Apparently I didn't. I have a bookmark, and it's like, this is all the way from like 2016, because I know this is my first glossy product I bought in 2016 when I was at school as a freshman. So like I think this is what I had left to read. So again, there's like in my library there's a lot of books, a lot of texts where it's like, you didn't finish this. But like as much as I read, The Art of Cruelty was definitely very rewarding, and I think what even maybe pushed me to sort of think of it again was in a novel that I recently read, The Superrationals by Stephanie LaCava. She brings up in the sort of faux dissertation that the but the main character, Mathilde, is writing, she talks about something in The Art of Cruelty that I was like, oh dang, like I haven't thought about Maggie Nelson in a while. But something about how like the critic or the reader of a work, like an artwork or a text or something, might be able to find meaning that like wasn't intended by the artist. And that's like, you know, I mean, profound in its obviousness, because it's like, of course, like, you know, a lot of times like that's how this works. Like the writer, you know, the creator of the work is not always the most reliable source for the meaning and like what the work is doing and all of that. But yeah, this is a work of criticism, looking at the art of cruelty in the different ways that that can be sort of teased out. And I remember this being like incredibly rewarding, and it would be nice to like sort of look at it again, also because the last novel that I finished, Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan, also brings up Maggie Nelson's work. And there's something in Acts of Desperation which, you know, is, to me, I found it sort of similar to like the Bart's thing of, you know, it's investigating this, or not investigating, but sort of like talking about this relationship between you know, this young woman and this older man, and sort of getting into, it's a like tumultuous relationship. And you know, it's very much like, it's very insular in the fact that like most of the novel is spent, you know, with either in this relationship or thinking around it, because we have like a retrospective view of like the narrator as an older version of herself, sort of thinking back to this, and so she's adding insight and commentary, but like it's, so much of it is like this relationship and like thinking about it, like you're very much feeling as you go, and so in that way I thought like it also sort of had the same sort of thing of like teasing out the different like grammars and conventions of like these sorts of relationships, particularly because it's a toxic, tumultuous relationship, so, you know, an abusive relationship as well. So like seeing the different like codes, you know, character codes of like, oh, of course he's doing that, of course she's doing that, you know, the dance, the script, that idea. But one of the more compelling parts that like I haven't stopped thinking about was an aside the character or the narrator makes in Acts of Desperation, thinking about this work of art by this male performance artist where he goes to be interviewed, and then I think he was not allowed to like do a specific performance on TV. It's one of those like censorship or like code stuff. So he goes to be interviewed, and then he, by this like female journalist, and then he basically sort of like all of a sudden, you know, holds her hostage and like has a knife to her neck, and it's something like TV hostage or something like that. I don't remember like the name of the artist or what it's called, but you know, it stuck with me, you know, and I wanted to see if this was one of those cases of like a made-up artist for the novel, or if it was a real thing, and it was real. And you know, in the picture you can see like the journalist is not aware that this is happening. It wasn't like something she was in on. So, you know, it's like the surprise of it, which, you know, when I read up stuff, like you see some commenters being like, oh yeah, like this really great, you know, performance artwork that was done, breaking boundaries and everything. But what it made me think of, and I think in the context of the novel too, like, which the novel is also, in terms of like those grammars of like love and relationships and everything, it's also like misogyny too. Like it's definitely an articulation of like misogyny, and I was thinking of that in terms of like the sort of artist that's thought of as a genius, and the sort of like harm that we allow for their genius. Like we can think of this right now with like Me Too, and like with the way that these, with the way that like, you know, the idea of like separating the art from the artist, or authorship, auteur theory, like just these ways that misogyny is often allowed, you know, for the sake of art to be expressed, or harm to be, you know, done. And obviously like I don't want to just be moralistic about this, you know, like it is boundary breaking, and that is, you know, the encasement that performance art like works in. Like it was shocking, it was titillating, it did bring about effect, but to what end, to what effect? So those were just like some things I was thinking of. And like, so in Acts of Desperation, like she does directly reference Maggie Nelson, and I was like, oh yeah, like the art of cruelty, and then that section, and I was like, oh yeah, I would love to come back to, you know, read this criticism and really sort of like think through these ideas. I know like Maggie Nelson, like it's funny to witness the sort of turn that people now have with like the Argonauts, which I wanted to read for a long time. Like writers that I respected like held that novel you know, high, and there is room for, you know, critiques where you're able to reflect and be like, I think I've seen a lot of people being like, as queer theory, it's not very like it actually ends up turning around and being like wildly transphobic or something like that. But that's the great thing about like literature, and like to bring it back to Playing in the Dark, like being able to look at that and like tease these things out with different lens makes us better readers and critics and writers and thinkers, and that's the thing I love about literature and art in general. Okay, and then final, I want to end on a lighter note, which will actually end up not even being like super light. But I think I want to reread Horse Crazy by Gary Indiana, mainly because I want to make a video sort of about it, which I never got to do when I first read it. And like when I did my wrap up, like it wasn't particularly like dense in a way that I would love to redo and have it be. And I think I would like to, a sort of challenge that I kind of want to do is like reviews, maybe even mini reviews of the things that I read, watch, you know, listen to, think about, sorts of intellectual exercises of like, you know, one, to get me to write more, and two, to get me to get better at arguing and reading and critiquing. So I think a reread would be nice. But yeah, Horse Crazy is basically a novel about an unnamed critic, this like 35-year-old critic who meets a man called Gregory and like falls in this you know, crazy infatuation, obsessive, you know, sort of one-sided relationship, and it's about power dynamics, and it's about the way like love can be, like, not to be corny, right, because there's also like all of this is with the background of like the AIDS crisis, and like the narratives like friends and lovers and strangers, you know, like just people acquaintances he's met in passing, like they're dying of this disease or contracting it through, you know, the intimate act of like sex and loving someone and being with someone, and there's just this sort of like this parallel of the incurable, and about the risk of loving someone or of wanting someone, desiring someone, and yeah, intimacy and all of that. Like it's just a really great text. I read this last summer, loved it so much. Like I think I read it like in 2 days or something. I have not stopped thinking about it. Like read this and I was like, oh, I have to pick up like anything Gary Indiana writes. I've now read Gone Tomorrow. I read that this summer. I really like that too, or this spring rather. And I actually haven't even talked about Gone Tomorrow on here. And I bought Depraved Indifference, which I want to read. It's part of his crime trilogy. And then McNally Editions, which I'm really looking forward to like reading some of the like stuff that they're putting out. But one of their 2020, so like January 2023 offerings is Rent Boy by Gary Indiana. It's this really great cover. Never read Rent Boy, and it's like a slim novel. So I'm looking forward to like buying that and like reading it. So yeah, these are, I mean, I have here like what, 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 here, and then I also talked about the Fanny Howe book that I want to read. So yeah, that's kind of like the agenda. Maybe we'll see how it goes. But yeah, this is sort of things that I'm feeling. I had made like a winter reading stack, and you know, some of these are on there, but like I'm also just like moving some pieces around.